As a part-time adjunct faculty member at a business school, I take my job very seriously. I'm not just there to teach my students the required curriculum. I also want to instill a sense of discipline and accountability in them that will carry them far beyond the walls of my classroom. And while most of my students are diligent and hardworking, there are always a few who try to take shortcuts or find ways to game the system. One semester, I discovered that some students were trying to do just that. They had discovered that I had a policy in many of the courses that I teach that if you do better on the final exam than on the midterm, your final exam grade replaces your midterm exam grade. And they were determined to exploit it. Apparently, in an earlier semester, a student took photographs of his exam paper, something that is strictly forbidden. Somehow, I didn't discover it at the time. But this time, I got an anonymous tip that my exam was compromised. I was grateful for the tip, but also a little annoyed that someone had tried to pull a fast one on me. I considered writing a completely new exam for that section of the course, but instead, I decided to test the student's assertion. I took the compromised exam and completely rewrote it. I made it look exactly the same as the old exam, but I changed the questions and answers subtly so that the correct answer would be very different. It was a clever bit of sleight of hand, and I was curious to see how it would play out. When the students took the exam, most of them did about as I would have expected. The class average was a little lower than usual, but that wasn't too surprising. However, about 7 students that clearly knew each other pretty well got very, very bad grades on the exam and failed it. None failed the course, but all of them had their overall grade go down significantly. I never heard a word of challenge from any of them. I've no idea if they figured out what I did, but I'm glad that student gave me the tip. It was satisfying to know that I had outsmarted them and that justice had been served. Since then, I've routinely been doing this every semester, just in case. I don't know if it's helping, but I feel like it keeps my students on their toes. And I take comfort in knowing that I'm not just teaching them business principles, I'm also teaching them the importance of honesty, integrity, and hard work. Those are lessons that will serve them well long after they've forgotten the details of the courses they took with me. As a teacher, I feel like I have a responsibility to not only educate my students, but also to prepare them for the real world. And the real world isn't always fair or easy. Sometimes you have to work hard and play by the rules to get ahead. And sometimes you have to be vigilant and smart to avoid getting taken advantage of. I'm proud of what I did, and I'll continue to be vigilant in the future. After all, I'm not just teaching my students how to be successful in business. I'm also teaching them how to be successful in life.
As a high school senior, I was never an exceptional student. My grades were always average, and I had never been in trouble. But for some reason, my algebra teacher, Mrs. Thompson, singled me out for ridicule. She had been teaching at our school for over a decade and was widely known for being a petty, heartless witch who the administrators adored. I tried my best to understand her lessons, but algebra was never my forte. I frequently asked questions, and while some may have considered them dumb, I struggled to grasp the concepts. Mrs. Thompson, on the other hand, took every opportunity to belittle me in front of the entire class. "Here comes the slow one again," she would say. "This is simple. What's wrong with you?" Her comments were hurtful and embarrassing, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't complain to the administration, as they saw Mrs. Thompson as a golden child. They would send someone to observe her in class, but she would behave for a day before returning to her cruel ways. For months, I endured her verbal abuse, but eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to take matters into my own hands and purchased a recorder from Radio Shack. I recorded every insult she threw my way, sometimes even instigating her to make up for lost time. I continued to record her for months, compiling a mountain of evidence against her. And then one day, Mrs. Thompson went too far. I asked a question, and she responded with, "I've been teaching for a decade." And that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from a student's mouth. I had had enough. I calmly stood up, packed my things, and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. The next day, I returned with my evidence and sat down with the principal. We listened to a few of the insults, and he stopped me, wanting more witnesses and Mrs. Thompson present. The following day, I found myself in a room with the board of directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Mrs. Thompson. I was nervous, but I had prepared for this moment for months. As we played the tape, I watched the administrators go from apathetic to outraged. Mrs. Thompson's confidence dissipated as she realized she had messed up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. When the tape ended, the principal turned to me and said, "I think we have heard everything we need to." And with that, I was dismissed from the room. As I left, I looked back at Mrs. Thompson, who had tears streaming down her face. Our eyes met, and I gave her the biggest, most evil smile I could muster. The next week, I returned to class, and Mrs. Thompson was nowhere to be found. The news of what had happened spread quickly throughout the school, and I was seen as a hero. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Mrs. Thompson to return to her teaching career. I had also cut off most of her connections with other teachers in the school, effectively ruining her financially.
Please like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you.